Hey everyone, thanks for coming to hang out with us here on Reppin. I'm Evelyn, your host. We've been so lucky to have some really amazing and wonderful people on the show, and we seem to have started a tradition of having intelligent, thoughtful, strong, courageous women who are using their voice and position to open doors and lift others up. Truly powerful women. And we continue that trend with my next guest. She is a talented actress and singer. You know her as Maris Lightwood on Shadowhunters. She's also been on Corner, October Faction, The Strain, My Spy, and Burden of Truth. She's been nominated for a Canadian Screen Award for her guest starring performance on Remedy, and she was named Best Actress in a Feature Film at the San Diego Film Out Festival for her work in Margarita. Are you ready? Let's go, because we've got Nicola Correia-Damude. Thank you so much for participating on the podcast, and I loved our conversation on the phone. And after talking with you, I'm so excited to hang out with you again today.
I feel the same way. I'm so excited.
Let's kind of take it from one.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about your background, your heritage, and let's go from there.
I'm the first generation born in Canada on my mom's side. So I'm mixed race. My mom's from Guyana. My mom came here. There was some people call it a civil war. Some people call it a race war. There was a major conflict in post-colonial Guyana. And around that time, my mom was sent to the States and she became a nurse, and Canada needed nurses. So she went alone to Canada to be a nurse when she was 20. And my father is Canadian and generations back to 1780. His family was here, and before that, British and Swiss and French. I refer to myself as mixed Guyanese Canadian.
Can you tell me what it was like growing up mixed race in Canada? So I'm Asian American, Chinese specifically, born and raised in one of the boroughs of New York City, but being from the suburbs or one of the boroughs of New York, it's very different than being from the actual city. So in my neighborhood, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity. I was kind of the odd duck.
Yeah.
What was it like for you?
I grew up in Toronto, so that's a very different experience because it's the biggest city in the country. So my understanding of the way the U.S. works, it's probably pretty similar in that because I grew up in a big city, there was a lot more diversity. One thing that I really noticed about it growing up, and this is something that I'm sure exists everywhere, but it's always the example I use to sort of describe what Toronto is like in terms of diversity. So when I was in grade school, I lived in a neighborhood in the city. It was sort of a neighborhood that was developing. So now it's a very hip, cool neighborhood. But when my parents bought there in the early 80s, it was right at the beginning. It was a lot of halfway houses, and then also a lot of academics and artists who were moving into the neighborhood. So this public school that I went to in my neighborhood actually had a huge amount of diversity. And I was sort of a privileged white kid at that school because the school had so many kids who were very new immigrants, or there were a lot of kids coming from war-torn countries and immigrating here. And we lived in a house. I was mixed. I was a lot whiter than a lot of the kids, and I had a lot more privilege. And then in junior high, I was in this program called the Gifted Program, where they sent you to a school that was out of district to go to this program. And overnight, I went from being white and privileged to being poor and ethnic, in the blink of an eye. Literally from one day to the next, because Toronto is one of those cities, like many, where it's big and there's lots of different pockets, and diversity and acceptance and all of that tends to exist inside those pockets. As a mixed kid, I had this very strange experience of my sort of identification changing overnight. Because in my neighborhood, as someone who was mixed and someone whose parents had enough money, and I actually was fairly privileged and I fell into that category. And I identified as white for a long time because so many of my peers were Black and Asian, and I was mixed. I could go either way. I sort of looked generally Latino to people. I went to this program in this very affluent white area of Toronto. All of a sudden, I was being referred to as ethnic, and I was considered, not very well off. People's parents didn't want them to come to my neighborhood because it was a bad neighborhood, and which wasn't true, but it was I really experienced how divided one city can be. And I think a lot of Canada is like that, probably not dissimilar to the US, where in the larger cities, you'll find more diversity, but it also exists in pockets. And in the wrong place, you encounter the same kind of racism and lack of diversity that you would anywhere else.
That switch, I think, would be difficult if it was slow.
Oh, it's so tricky.
Of going from being the privileged white person to the ethnic poor person, that would be a difficult transition if it was happening over months.
Yeah.
How crazy, like, what was that like to have that happen so quickly?
It was very strange because most of the kids were sent from out of district. So we were sort of thrown into the school. I didn't know anyone. First of all, everyone looked the same, which was new to me. I had grown up in a neighborhood with a lot of, everyone. There were tons of different cultures and different colors of people. And then I was suddenly in this environment where there was this sort of homogenous culture. It was right around then that I started to become aware that my identification was a question mark for other people. I actually hadn't questioned all that much how I identified until that moment. Because I grew up in such a diverse community as a kid, I didn't actually think too much about how I identified in terms of my race. And then when I went to this new school and people started pointing out that my mom was brown and that my mom had an accent, and there was like that, I was one of two kids who didn't have white parents. Suddenly the fact that it was different became much more glaring. And it was the first time that it was really an issue. And then moving forward, since then, it's always sort of been an issue. Definitely as an actor, it's a constant issue.
Being that you kind of got thrown into this weird situation with this weird switch, the dynamic of going from being the privileged white person to the poor ethnic person, from the point of recognition of like junior high school, all the way to now and being an actress. Can you talk about the journey of recognizing the challenges of being mixed race or people not knowing what to label you as?
Yeah.
And how you've dealt with it?
There's a few areas where that idea of being other has areas that have been more challenging than others. And one of those areas is, I think when you fall somewhere in between, there's a lot of searching that you have to do to figure out where you belong.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember when my first theater job, when I still was sort of figuring out how I identified, and I was doing a play, and I had a mentor on that who was a woman of color, who was a Black woman from the Caribbean. And I made reference at some point to being a white woman. And she took me aside and she said, I really think that we should talk about your identification, because I think that identification could be harmful for you. And I think that also it's really important that other young women of color can look up to you and can see, what you've achieved, and that you can be sort of a mentor to them. But I really struggled with that, because a lot of the women that she was talking about were young women who had like immigrated here as children or as teenagers, who had struggles that I had never had. As a mixed person, I hadn't experienced the racism that they did at all. So I felt like I couldn't really claim to understand their experience. As a mixed person, you do sort of fall somewhere down the center. And we're living in a time when it's very important to people for you to identify as something specific. I don't think it's that simple. And then you get into privilege and you get into the opportunities that you are either given or denied because of that. And it also depends a lot on how you're received by the people around you, what community you grew up in. Ultimately, I was very lucky that I grew up in a household where we could have these conversations. So that was really helpful. But I can imagine, and I have friends who grew up in less inclusive communities, where it became a really heartbreaking thing for them to try and figure out where they belonged. I think it's really interesting too, because we're living in a time where we almost have a bit of a fetishizing interest in people who are different from ourselves.
Okay. Can you give me an example?
One of the compliments that bothers me when people pay me, when someone pays me a compliment, is like, I used to get like exotic a lot. And to me, there's kind of like a weird backhanded compliment in there where it's like, okay, I get that you're telling me you find me attractive, but you're measuring it against what you think is normal. And there's a lot of fetishizing of women who are not white. And so we have to also be careful not to sort of overemphasizing difference either. Anytime we place value on someone purely because of something like color, or anything that makes us different, as soon as we start placing value based on one judgment that we have, or what, we're in trouble.
Yeah, right. No, that's a really good point to make.
When you're mixed, especially in my industry, one of the big struggles that I encounter is like, all of a sudden, after being too curvy, too ethnic, too fat, too dark, too this, too that for so many years, all of a sudden people are really interested in women who look like me. Me being identified by the culture at large as a person of color has become a positive thing for me in my work. On the other hand, I don't see that happening with my Asian friends. I don't see that happening with a lot of my Black friends who don't fit the aesthetic mold that the culture thinks that they should. When you're mixed and you could sort of go either way, people can claim you as a person of color without actually addressing the fact that you still are, I'm still very much on the spectrum of white. And I have to be very aware of the fact that I have encountered a lot of racism in my career, but never on the scale of my Asian friends or my Black friends or my South Asian friends.
Right.
Like, so I have to be very careful about not over identifying either, because I'm having these opportunities now in a way that they're not.
Right.
In myself, there's a divide. And what I'm trying to do as an adult, now that I'm getting more confident in these conversations and in sort of asking myself these questions, is I'm trying to not see it as a divide. I'm trying to see it as two parts of a whole that are who I am. Like it's one thing. It's not two parts. It is who I am. And what I think is so funny is that my son, by the time my son, who's now 5, by the time he's our age, most kids will be mixed to some degree. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this whole conversation is going to be completely different. Like this is a topic because it's still fairly new. And I am really the first generation where this conversation is normalized.
I think you're right.
This is changing rapidly. You know, my son's half Uruguayan, a quarter Guyanese, and a quarter white Canadian. And he looks fairly Caucasian. He's much fairer than my husband and I for some reason. We're not sure how that worked genetically, and I'm really curious, you know, is it going to be the kind of thing where everyone just is who they are? Or is he going to be having these conversations where he's, you know, trying to figure out his identification or defending his identification to people? Like, I'm curious, but I think probably not. I think it'll be much more normalized to just have many parts of who you are.
You sort of hinted that you can kind of play Latin or some kind of minority. And I know this is a podcast and people can't see you, but Nicola, you are gorgeous. So all these comments about you being too whatever. So I don't know what the fuck these people are saying. Sorry, I didn't mean to say fuck, but we already
No, please
did
say
it.
fuck.
Anyway.
I love fuck.
All right, cool.
It's a great
Me too.
word.
I love fuck too. But there is something really important that I want to bring up. On your website, you said, as a female actor of mixed heritage, you're passionate about seeing more cultural diversity on screens, stages, expanding roles for women, and also improving conditions for mothers and families in film and the television industry. I love this so hard.
Thank you.
Having this statement on your website is so awesome. Talk about why that was important for you to put on your website and sort of your position on this.
I mean, we could go into the 185,000 issues, but the two that I think I'm most passionate about are body image and
Yes.
and body diversity.
Yes.
It's a huge one for me. And also the position of women as mothers in industry. So I'll speak to the body diversity one first. So one of the things that I have found to be more of an issue is women and the discrimination based on body type. Don't get me wrong, it happens to men too.
Absolutely.
But I think we're all aware that it has been historically and continues to be a much bigger issue for women on a grand scale. In my experience, one of the things that has been the most detrimental to me as a young person was the images of women were always the same. There was these very static images of women. They always had the same body. They were always blonde or brunettes, but they were always white. They were always thin. There were minor exceptions, but very, very rarely.
Yes.
And if there were exceptions, they were always the underdog.
Right.
There's this amazing book, The Beauty Myth. It's a Naomi Wolf book. And it was really eye-opening for me about how we use our way that we discriminate against women based on their bodies and their appearance is a way of socially controlling women. By telling women that there are standards that they must stick to in order to be attractive, in order to be valuable, by connecting our value as professionals to how we look, we are essentially externally controlling women and our self-esteem and our ability to be productive. The example that I'll give is early in my career, I was taken into the office of the director I was working with, and we had a company I'd always wanted to work for. And I had the job already, and I went in and he said, you know, your character is supposed to be young and beautiful. So if you could lose some weight, that would be really helpful to the production. Now, for interest's sake, I was 24 years old. I was 20 pounds thinner than I am now. So looking back on it, there was no issue with the way I looked. It was obviously devastating and humiliating for me at the time.
Right.
This was happening to women all around me in my industry. And what I came to realize is that this man, he didn't actually have any issue with the way I looked. He wouldn't have cast me if he had an issue with the way I looked.
True.
What he was trying to do was he was trying to lower my self-esteem to a place where I would be vulnerable to him and to his control in the workplace. Every once in a while, people will be talking about body image or something, and someone will go, oh, God, I mean, like, there's so many bigger issues to talk about. And, perhaps that's true, but we're not just talking about the way people look. When we talk about the way women's bodies have been treated by the media and by our culture, we're talking about, in my opinion, a very real weapon of control. We have an entire industry built on trying to make women feel bad about themselves so that we will spend money on products. We have an entire corporate industry that's based on making us believe that women's appearances and whether women are having children or not is the major sort of measure of their value, which again is complete bullshit. To me, it's a much larger issue. This is not just about glossy magazine covers and diet books. This is about a way that a culture has controlled an entire gender for decades. And so I feel very passionately that it's a much bigger conversation and than just being about health and fitness.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it intersects with race. For example, one thing that I've noticed is I'm a size 8, 10, and I'm still the biggest woman on every set I'm on. I still get comments about
That's
it,
crazy.
which is crazy, right? Like, it's totally
It's
crazy.
insane.
And I'm very proud of that. But I'm also like, I'm just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many women who are gorgeous and bigger than me. And there's so many women who exist in all kinds of different body types that we're not even seeing. But where I find it intersects with race sometimes is that I was talking earlier about the fetishization of women from different cultures. And one of the things that I've noticed is my body is instantly perceived as provocative because it's curvy, right? There are costume designers and there are TV shows I've done where there's a fear that if you don't put me in big baggy clothes, I'll look too sexy. Because the second you can see my body, I'm too sexy. Because by nature of the fact that I have curves and that I have this sort of Latin body type, I'm instantly hypersexualized in their minds for an audience, which is just crap. It's just because we haven't seen it enough.
Right.
And also, it's an insult to the women who are less curvy, to the tiny women who are also sexual beings. There's an area where it intersects with race, where we also have a lot of perceptions about different cultures' bodies and what they mean to us, how the dominant culture perceives other cultures, right? So one thing that I noticed is I travel in Latin America a lot, and every time I get to a Latin American country, I feel so beautiful. And I'd actually never really felt beautiful until the first time I went to Argentina and Uruguay. It was the first time that I was in my 20s and I looked around and I went, oh my God, all the women look like me and no one has a problem with that. And no one's telling them not to wear bathing suits and no one's telling them to cover up, because I'd spent my whole life in a largely Anglo and very sort of white culture dominant society where I was always being told that I was a lot, physically I was a lot. And then I go to South America and I feel beautiful and I feel sexy and I'm wearing bathing suits and I'm not caring what I put on in the mornings. I just feel generally good about myself. The last 2 or 3 times I came home, I would come home to some sort of comment from a casting director or someone about my weight. And I would just suddenly go like, oh my God, how come I can feel beautiful everywhere in the world except for my own culture, my own country? And it's because we have this very narrow image of what beautiful women are. I love that quote. If all the women in the world woke up tomorrow feeling beautiful, a multi-billion-dollar industry would fall.
You're making my head spin. I never thought of it being weaponized to control a gender.
Oh my God, it's huge.
You are in incredible shape. If you look on your Instagram, first of all, I need a nap just looking at your Instagram workout. Your exercise routine is crazy. You're lifting these enormous weights. You're doing all these crazy lunges and pushes. I don't even know what it is. There's like some guy standing on this thing that you're pushing. I mean, your workout is nuts. Yeah. But you said something on your social media that I wanted to quote. Measure your power, not your dress size.
Yes, that's my hashtag. That's my hashtag. And I'm so proud of that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I created that hashtag when I started doing a bunch of posts about positive body image for women. And what I found was that we always have this focus on our size and on our weight. And in actual fact, once I started getting stronger and committing to my health in a different way, I did start feeling better about myself. I mean, I was bullied horribly as a kid for my weight and also my height. I was always the tallest kid. I was almost fully grown at 11. I was a giant compared to the other kids. I've been on a diet since I was 8 years old.
Oh, man.
And then the outside messaging. And so I started Measure Your Power, Not Your Dress Size as a hashtag and also as a mantra for women who are trying to start to actually see value in themselves outside of what they see in the mirror that they're not happy with. Because first of all, they're probably wrong. They're probably just great. The problem with the diet industry and with all of this, the industry that has become women's bodies as an industry of something to change
Right.
is also that there's very little focus on the actual physical and mental health of women, right? The focus is about fitting into that little black dress
Right.
and that's just dieting. That's not about you feeling good about yourself and feeling valued and having value. Go for a walk, find what you like, dance, run around, do whatever you want, but get engaged in your body where your body has power beyond what it looks like, where your body is a powerful thing that you can appreciate. And then our brains start to change, our self-respect starts to change. We see value in ourselves because of our strength and not because of what clothes we're putting on our bodies.
So right.
And that actually transitions perfectly into the second thing I'm passionate about, which is women and families in my industry. And the reason it connects is because after an entire lifetime of having my body criticized, and both socially and in my work, I then had a baby. And for the first time in my entire life, I had this sense of how incredible my body was. It had grown a person and then pushed it out and then put itself back together and like went through all this crap. I would look in the mirror and for the first time I could look at my body and go, wow, this is an amazing thing. This body is a gift. This body is powerful. It's all of these things that I'd never seen it like that before because all I'd worried about before was what the outside world thought it looked like and how it compared to other women, right? And having a child did change that for me. And I've heard the same story from women who have been through major accidents or illnesses where they see what their body can do and it gives them an appreciation. Anytime your body is put in a position to prove itself to you as this incredible gift, I think we can start to transition our thinking around ourselves. And so that brings me to the issue of being a mother in the entertainment industry. One thing that I found was that there's a lot of fear around becoming a mother if you work in film and not just as an actor. And it's not just in the entertainment industry, it's in any industry. Anything that takes you away from work. It's almost like we see it as like a weakness. You have a child and suddenly you've lost your potential. Many times when I was in my 20s, had people say, if you want to make it in film and television, don't turn 30 and don't have a baby. And like, first of all, let's break down that advice for a second. Don't turn 30.
How do you do that?
So either you have to die or your value just like disappears once you turn 30. And don't have a baby. So don't make this major life decision because it will somehow diminish your value so much that you're going to be worth nothing anymore. I knew I wanted to have a baby. I knew I wanted to be pregnant. And my TV career had just started to happen a little bit, but not really. And my husband and I made the really tough decision, or I made the really tough decision because he was totally open with me making the decision I was comfortable with, that I was going to regret it more if I didn't try to have a child and wasn't able to than if I did and took the chance of losing the career I could have had. So I made that decision for myself. And then in my case, what happened that is very rare and I'm very lucky is that somehow through an amazing combination of things, the interest in sort of Latinx women in television, the interest in diversity increasing, a very slight interest in different body types, like all of these things in the culture were shifting just as I was having my child. And also having my child made my work better. And all of a sudden, my television and film career took off while I had a newborn. Like literally, I was shooting the shows that really broke me through into a full-time career in film and TV were while I was breastfeeding a small baby.
That's so awesome. What was that like for you?
That was an incredibly empowering experience, but also really eye-opening in terms of how we view women with children as being compromised somehow, right?
Right.
This idea of like, well, how is she going to do her job if she has a baby? First of all, you're going like, A, that's my business. B, no one's asking my husband that. And it's not that there isn't some truth to that. Like there were definitely issues that I had to deal with, but I'm a professional and I did my job and we made, we made things work. We have this weird fear of hiring women with children to do their jobs. When in actual fact, that saying, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person.
Right.
If you want someone who knows how to get shit done, if you want someone who knows how to make the most of their time, you go to a mom.
Oh, yeah.
You go to a mom who knows how to multitask. We are more prepared. We are more passionate. We are more raring to go. We were good at our jobs before. We're good at our jobs after.
Right.
True equality in the workplace will only happen when we see the responsibility for children as being both a mother and a father, or two parents, whether they're male, female, 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 male, male, that both parents are seen as equally responsible for the child, and where the culture sees the caring of children as being imperative to a functioning society where men and women both work. Some important cultural differences in terms of how we talk about parenting with men and women too. So, for example, my husband, his name's Carlos Gonzalez Vio. He's also an actor, incredible actor. I think a month after my son was born, his arc on Orphan Black finished, and he said, I'll stay home.
He's a good guy.
We'll prioritize your career. And we also need more men like this, and allies who are men who can also fight for this with us. Or in same-sex couples, you need both partners to be on the same page, because he said, I know it's going to be harder for you to get your career back than it is for me. So let's focus on your career for the next couple of years. We'll prioritize your work.
That's awesome.
So that you can get your confidence back and that you can see that you can do this. And he actually stayed home with my son most of the time while I was working in those first couple of years so that I could establish my career. And not only did it create an incredible bond with him and my son, and we're absolutely equal parents to my son, which is a beautiful thing, but it also gave me the freedom to continue to work at the level that he would have been allowed to work and that he was allowed to continue working at. And what we found interesting was when my husband started shooting again, he was working all the way through, but he took more time off than I did to be at home. But one of the things that we found really interesting was whenever I travel for work, and I find this with a lot of mothers, people say to the mother, "Oh, wow, that must be so hard on your son." When he travels for work, people say, "Oh, that must be so hard on you, not seeing your son," right? The suggestion being that when the mom's not there, it's bad for the kid. When the dad's not there, it's hard for the dad to not be with the kid.
Yeah.
And it's such an insult to the dads as well, because my son needs his dad absolutely. Like you get out of these relationships what you put in.
Yeah, for sure.
But we don't live in a culture that supports that, right? Like a lot of dads want to be home with their kids and they can't be because as artists, we don't get unemployment insurance. We don't get any of that stuff. So someone has to be home. And oftentimes because we've gained weight and because people are afraid of women working when they have small children, we're not being given, women who've just had children aren't being offered jobs. So the men end up working out of necessity, even if they'd like to be home. So the whole system needs to change.
I'm still trying to process all the things that you were talking about, like going back really quickly. When you said that, the body industry, you're right. It's like $1 billion business that depends on us women feeling bad, essentially.
Loathing ourselves.
Because if it's a wellness industry, shouldn't we be more concerned with our actual physical health and our mental state?
This is why I find the term wellness hysterical, because it's got nothing to do with wellness.
It's about trying to get your ass into a black dress.
Exactly. I have so many tools and I have come out the other end and I feel powerful and I feel good, and I still worry about my freaking weight and my dress size every single day. And the reality is that there's no way not to do that for a lot of women because it's all around us.
Yeah, you can't escape it.
I went to the doctor recently and he was like, "So what do you want to do about your face?"
What?
And I was like, "My face?" Yeah. And he was like, "Well, there's some stuff we could do." And he started suggesting different cosmetic things. And he's like, "Well, you have rosacea and you have this and that." And I was like, no, I'm good with my face. Thank you very much. My face is just fine. I'm going to just leave now. Like, what are we going to do about your face? We're going to do nothing about my fucking face because there's nothing wrong with my face. My face looks like my face.
Tell me you never went back again.
Oh God, no, of course not. But it was like, but that's happened to me more than once.
That's so messed up.
This is similar to the question of what I was saying about me being mixed race. I'm referred to most of the time as a person of color by other people in my work, and I'm totally comfortable with that. One of the reasons that I don't personally use that term myself is because I'm very aware that I fall in a very privileged middle ground. There's a cultural palatability to me because people don't know where I go and I fall somewhere in the middle. Similarly with body type, I have always been criticized in my industry for being bigger and larger than most women are. However, in the world at large, I've never had to deal with that kind of harassment. I have female friends who are overweight, who are harassed out in the world. Most of the fan mail that I get from young women, especially women in Latin America, but also in other cultures in other countries where which is most countries where women's bodies are very controlled, where they say like, "I've never seen someone who looked like me on TV, and you look like me." And I take incredible pride in that. I've had women who work in costumes and makeup, women on set, crew members, be like, "It's so nice to see someone on set who has my body," and I'm very proud of that. But I also want to be very, very clear that the fact that I am an example of a person of color in my industry, the fact that I am an example of a quote, larger or plus size woman is a problem in and of itself.
Yes.
If I am your example, that means we have light years to go.
Yeah.
Right?
And we do.
And what about women who are legitimately gorgeous plus size women who are out there in the world being completely ignored in my industry? What about the women of color who aren't even being brought in for these auditions? And I fall right down the middle of a lot of these issues, which is an interesting vantage point because I get to have these conversations in a way with both sides, but I also have to be very careful not to claim to understand the struggle of my peers who exist in a in what is a more clearly defined role in our culture than I do.
I really have to applaud you for many reasons, but one in particular is that you have the sensitivity and awareness and understanding that you are in this position. I mean, it's really great that you know that there are people out there who are minorities who are really experiencing and struggling with these challenges and being marginalized.
And who have experienced far greater discrimination and
Right.
far greater prejudice than I have.
Yes.
I've embarrassed myself a few times when I'm in the company of friends who have experienced, because of their ethnicity or because of their body type, experienced much greater marginalization than I have. And I found myself wanting to participate in that conversation because I have experienced some of that, but then I have to remember not to over-identify because I do not know what it's like. My friends who are, young Black women who literally are being targeted on the street,
Right.
who are being denied access
Right.
to services, or women who are overweight who are being insulted on their way home. And there's lots and lots of levels to marginalization, right? There's lots of levels to discrimination.
Yeah. And if you over-identify, it's offensive to the other people then.
So offensive. It's so offensive. I wanted to make one quick point before I forget. I've been listening to your show and it's amazing and I'm so grateful
Thank
for
you.
it. And it's exactly what we need in the world right now. So I send my greatest, deepest gratitude to you.
Oh, thank you.
But one of the questions that you asked in one of the episodes that I thought was so interesting was why representation matters.
Yes.
One of the things that I think people don't realize, this ties into both the race and the body type cultural issues that I was talking about. It's all sort of summed up in one example for me. So I was doing a movie a number of years ago. It was set in the past. The costume designer had gone to the warehouse where all of the studios house their costumes when the shows are done. And she didn't find any costumes my size in the warehouse because there's not very many actresses my size. And so when we did my fitting, she said, and I quote, "We're going to have to make all your costumes by hand because women your size didn't exist in that country then."
Huh?
And I said, "Sorry, what?" And I said, "Women my size didn't exist."
That's such bullshit.
In fact, all women in that country looked like me. But her whole perception was what she had seen on television. She didn't have any concept of the reality of it. It's the same for most of us growing up. When we don't see ourselves represented, literally then your culture is telling you that you do not exist and that people around you are surprised by you. It's why I have issues with being told I'm exotic when people pay me a compliment. It's like, I'm not exotic. How am I more? You're very exotic if you go to Latin America. You're comparing me to what you've seen on television. You're not actually considering that you don't know what's out there, right?
Right.
So if we don't represent all of the different types of people in the world, we are essentially excluding them from our consciousness as a culture. And that to me is the key point.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so much bigger than just how people look or what we're saying about different races. You are excluding them from the consciousness of your culture. And that is a dangerous and very painful, very insidious thing.
It just highlights again, like, okay, yeah, we've made some strides, right? Some strides.
So far to go.
We have so far to go. There's so many layers there, Nicola, that you just laid out that, things that I hadn't even considered.
One question that I get a lot when I talk about representation is there's two ethnicities in my own city that I get asked to audition for every race under the sun. And I'm okay with that. There's two.
Not Asian.
Well, no, but this is what I was going to say is I used to get asked to audition for some Asian roles, not because they thought I looked Asian, but because there was a time when it would be like, well, if we can't find an Asian person, and one of the problems was that for so long, there were no opportunities for people of color, that when the interest in people of color started happening, a lot of casting agents and companies didn't have those actors on their roster. They'd never been given a chance, right? So people like me, who again fell somewhere in the middle, would get called to kind of to just represent that and to be there. And that was the beginning of a process that was important. So for example, like, I will not audition to play Indigenous characters and Native Canadian characters. And I won't audition to play Black African-American or African characters, which happens sometimes because, and this is, I know it seems crazy, but it happens. But the reason is, in my own community, the Indigenous actors and my Asian friends, my Indigenous colleagues and my Black colleagues are the ones who are still, they're not being seen. They're not being brought into the room as much as they should be. A lot of these great talents haven't been mined yet, right? So for me, it's like, until they are getting the opportunities, I'm not going to take their opportunities. But then whenever I say that, people say to me, oh, so what? You can only play your own race? Okay, give me a break. Would I be saying that? Have you ever seen a Guyanese Canadian character on TV? Never. Of course, I'm not saying you can only play your own race or I wouldn't have a career. What I'm saying is that I feel a responsibility to be proactive in being a part of making sure that the people who are still in the position that I was in 10 years ago are getting the push that they need. If people like me won't audition to play their parts, then they're going to have to find them so that they can play their parts. And then when we're all playing all the parts, then we can loosen all this stuff up again. So of course, I'm not saying you can't play other ethnicities. I would have no career if I could only play my own ethnicity. Literally, no one has ever written a part for my ethnicity, except for a show I was on, Burden of Truth.
Yes.
And God love him, Brad Simpson, the creator of Burden of Truth. My first day on set, I said, what do you think Diane's ethnicity is? Because I knew that there was initially a storyline. I think it got cut. There might be a reference to it in season 3, but in season 1, the idea was that the Kristen Krug's character, Joanna Chang, and my character, Diane Evans, had met as the only 2 members of the mixed race student club or something like that, because they were the only 2 non-white kids in a white school in a small town, and that's what brought them together.
Okay.
So I knew that she was supposed to be, and it was great, but I knew that she was supposed to be mixed inside, but I didn't know what the mix was. And I asked Brad Simpson, the creator, who's a brilliant and an ally, and he's just a brilliant man. And he said, why do you ask? And I said, well, because I've never in my entire life seen a Guyanese Canadian character on TV. And I was just curious. First, sort of jokingly, he was like, great, she's Guyanese Canadian. And I said, oh, sure, ha, ha, ha. And then a week later, I get a script. And in the script, I refer to myself as the character as being Guyanese Canadian. And he called me and he said, if you can tell me how your mother could have ended up in this small white town, then I will write it into the script. And so I told him my mom's story and he wrote it into the script.
I love Brad Simpson.
I started crying, and the calls I got from my Guyanese family being like, oh my God, they said Guyana on TV. Oh my God. There's going to be a little girl out there who looks like me, who's watching me and seeing that. And she is going to feel seen and valued in a way that I never did. And those are the proudest moments. Brad Simpson is a white man who comes from a background of privilege, but he is using that privilege and he is listening. He's listening to what we are saying we need as the people who have not been seen, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we need more of.
We need more people like Brad to leverage their position to move us all forward positively. And I'm really glad you brought up Burden of Truth. It's a show that I enjoy. And I love that there's this great representation both on and off screen. On screen, your character, Diane, and Kristen's character, Joanna, are friends. And I know you guys are friends off screen too, which is great that camaraderie is there. But I also love that the series has some really great, strong female characters who are independent, who are smart women, who aren't tripping over themselves for a guy. And don't get me wrong, I love a great romantic storyline as much as the next person. But it's just really nice to see a show that has these great characters with, other things to talk about. And to have your characters be supportive of one another. Your character, Diane, is, very warm and social, whereas Kristen's character is all business and kind of awkward. And you guys are still great friends. There's none of this cattiness that's often portrayed. When we talked the other day, you said something that I think is so important to hit on. On the show, there is a young lesbian teen couple, but there's also storylines about Indigenous people. And you said something that made me really happy that I watched the show, both from an audience perspective and certainly me being a producer. You guys don't write about anything if there's no representation behind the scenes.
That is one of the things that I am so in love with about that team, is that the representation is present in the writer's room. The representation on the screen is also represented in the writer's room. And that to me is the future of positive representation and of making the change in the world that we need to make. It's something that I push for as someone of mixed race who plays many different ethnicities. One of the things that I insist on is I won't play unless there is someone who is consulting, who is from the culture and the country that we're talking about. I'm not interested in the project. I need to know that there is someone in the room who is a part of that community who is saying, this makes me feel this way, this makes me feel that way. And that's what they have on Burden. And as a result, I think the honesty in those characters is incredibly deep because they come from a place of firsthand exploration and firsthand representation. I mean, they're brilliant writers and they could write anything for sure, but there are nuances and there are feelings and there are experiences that you have to understand a community. You have to understand a culture to really know what those nuances are, and to find the core of that integrity, right? And so I love Burden for that. And like you said, I also love Burden because the women are not catty with each other.
Yes.
There's none of this like, I'm taking your boyfriend, I'm taking your man. No, these are women who are focused on their jobs, who have families, who are supportive of each other. What I love about the friendship, Diane and Joanna are best friends, and they're completely different. And they find each other mystifying in a lot of ways, but they don't judge that about each other. They love that about each other. They confront each other about these things. They're honest with each other. They're not going behind each other's backs going, I don't get her. They're saying to each other sometimes, I don't get you. Like, one of the things I love about the Diane character is that she'll say to Joanna, like, okay, well, hold on, like, explain this to me. What are you thinking here? And Joanna does the same thing with Diane, and they're learning from each other and they're helping each other grow. And it's the key difference in female relationships. We often see women in TV trying to tear each other down, and in real life, unfortunately. And what I love about Burden is that these are two women who are very different, who are taking the opportunity to become better by exploring what the hell is going on with the other one. And they respect each other for their differences and for who they are. And even when they have conflicts and when they disagree, they have a fundamental respect for each other. And that is the heart of all good relationships. And Kristen, I mean, Kristen Kruk is one of the greatest human beings that I know. Her kindness, she's an incredibly generous person, personally and emotionally. I've never heard her say an unkind word to anyone, and she's in an incredibly stressful position professionally, but she's just a really good friend. And she's one of those people who is genuinely interested in other people. Yeah, I can't say enough about her. She's an exceptional human.
That's great to hear. But I would be remiss not to point out something you just said about not going to audition for specific parts, because that's taking away from groups that are so in the dark and so far in the back of the pack that people aren't even looking. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is not a small point. And that really speaks to the person that you are.
There's so many things that are scary about the world right now, and there's so many ways to feel hopeless. And we're in an industry where change seems to be coming slowly, and it's easy to get discouraged. But, I have been very lucky also to work with some mentors and some executives and directors who are really trying to do all the stuff that we're talking about. And, Brad Simpson and Kyle Irving, one of the executive producers of Burden of Truth, when we work we work with a lot of the storylines of a lot of Indigenous content, and his respect for the Indigenous communities that he brings us into, and the real awareness of paying our respects to the people whose land we're on. But also, in terms of women, like, I don't know if you've seen Corner yet. It's actually coming to the CW this year. Adrienne Mitchell and Morwen Brebner, the showrunner and executive producer and writer and director of Corner, they're both women who have taught me a lot about how you can go through the struggles of coming up as a woman in this industry, and you can turn that into an opportunity to raise up the women that are coming after you. They're both people that I consider mentors. The issue of women needing to lift up other women is going to be a huge part of the shift that we're going to see. And I've had the opportunity to work with women who are doing that, and with men who are doing that as well. And the more we can champion each other, and the more we can really put our energy into creating environments where what we are doing is raising people up, period.
Right.
Nothing but good can come of that.
Right.
Nothing but good can come of that. And I've been lucky, my hopes have been raised hugely by working with these people. And there's many, many more. I remember seeing this to Adrian Mitchell when we finished Coroner. It's like, seeing the diversity on that show and seeing the respect and the mentorship that she offered me as a woman in her position gave me this hope and this pride in my gender and this pride in what I do and this real hope for the future. And we just have to, and I hope to pass that on. I hope that that's what I'm doing with the young women who come to me for mentorship. I hope that I'm doing the same thing for them because, again, back to representation, if we see it, we know it can be done. If we see it, it can become a part of our consciousness. If we're treated with kindness, if we're treated with respect, we will have the ability to pass that on. So I'm incredibly humbled by the people in my life who've given me that opportunity to feel that protection and that growth from them. It's the key to the future, right? The key to the future is giving everyone the respect that you want to receive and growing as a global community that treats each other with fairness and with love and with equal representation.
Absolutely. I would love to keep you all day, but Nicola, I have to ask you for our signature sign off.
Yeah.
Let us know who you are and what you represent.
My name is Nicola Correia-Damude, and I represent the people who refuse to be told that we are not enough.
With thanks and love to Nicola for her time and for sharing so much of herself with us. Be sure to keep up with her through social media. Nicola's Twitter handle is NicolaNCD, and her Instagram handle is Nicola Summer. Links are provided in the episode description. Next up, we have actress Natalie Kelly. You know her from the mega hit Fast and Furious, Tokyo Drift, as well as Baker and the Beauty. You're going to see a whole new side of her as she opens up in this very personal conversation, and you'll never guess where we catch up with her and what she's doing off screen.
Hi, this is Natalie Kelly, and this is Reppin.
Reppin is available on all top podcast platforms, so subscribe. Tell your friends and leave a review. And I want to hear from you, so tweet me. My handle is Reppin Podcast. And follow me on Instagram at Reppin_podcast. Thanks always to Nelson Pinero, my musical composer and technical director, for all of his time and talent. And always love and thanks to Gracie Kong. Reppin is a Suburban Outlaw Productions. Until next time, be sure to stand up and represent.